Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot of exciting content today. My name is Jesse Worker. I'm with the World Resources Institute. Again, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar as part of Open Gov Week, hosted by the Open Government Partnership, with whom we have partnered with for several years on the work that you're going to hear about today. Today's webinar is on open data strategies for climate action. It comes out of work that WRI has partnered with the Open Data Charter, the governments of Uruguay and Chile, and supported by the Inter-American Development Bank and the Open Government Partnership Multi-Donor Trust Fund. So we want to express our deep gratitude to the supporters, the donors for this work, and the partners both in government and civil society who worked with us to make this possible. We launched a working paper at WRI a few months back in March about the benefits, the challenges, and the strategies for implementing open data approaches to climate action. And we just want to share a few of the high-level takeaways from that paper. And then we have a wonderful panel of experts from across sectors and across the world whom I'll introduce after the presentation. And we'll have some questions for them. We hope to have time. We'll work to make sure we have time for a question and answer at the end. And I wanted to just make sure that everyone who is most comfortable listening in Spanish knows that you can click the globe icon at the bottom right of your Zoom screen, and that will enable you to go to the Spanish speaking room where we have interpretation. So thank you all. And I think we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation now. Give me just 1 second. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to jump right in. What do we mean by open data? First of all, if you're not an open data person, but first of all, just wanted to give a quick background. If you're not familiar with the World Resource Institute, I sit in the Governance Center, where I work extensively with other teams, including WRI's climate program. But we focus on data research, building networks, and building the capacity of government and civil society to integrate and implement critical environmental governance principles such as transparency, participation, and accountability into their policies, into their legal frameworks, into their implementation. So what do we mean by open data? There's lots of definitions that are floating around. This one I find is very succinct and easy to understand from a GovLab, NYU GovLab publication. So we're talking about publicly available data that can be universally and readily accessed, used, and redistributed free of charge, that's structured for usability and computability. So it's not data that is listed in a table in a PDF. It's meant to be something that can be easily shared and reused. So the next question, I think, is why are we having this conversation about open data and climate action? Doesn't the UNFCCC and the International Climate Forum generally address transparency fully? So it's important to acknowledge that the Paris Agreement and the subsequent Paris Rulebook established what they call an enhanced transparency framework. And for those who are not deep in the UNFCCC space, I just want to summarize it really quickly for everyone. And what it does is it makes sure it calls on countries to provide more regular, consistent, and clear greenhouse gas inventories. So all countries must submit those inventories at least biennially. And they have to be using the same metrics so we understand what actions countries are doing to reduce emissions to get us to that critical goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Also calls on countries to report their progress on implementing their nationally determined contributions. Again, these are the instruments of which countries tell the world, this is what we're doing to mitigate emissions and to adapt to climate change. That progress is based on indicators that countries have that they determine nationally. And then finally, there's an obligation for countries that are providing financial and capacity building support to provide information on that support provided. and there's a invitation or a should instead of a shall for countries that receive that support to provide information on the support they receive, as well as information, an invitation to provide on adaptation and impacts as well. So that's really important information, but I just want to summarize really quickly why that's not enough. There are no open data requirements in this. So there's no, the UNFCCC does not put any obligations on countries that they make the data that goes into that they collect on climate change, its impacts, its risk, and the actions they're taking to address them open for domestic stakeholders. And there's lots of other nationally relevant data that's critical for climate decision making. A few examples: sectoral emissions, in the impacts of actions that countries are taking, how are they impacting emissions and adaptation and vulnerability. The details of the implementation: where are countries in implementing their different policies, and how is it leading to impact. The risk to vulnerable groups, the co-benefits in terms of air pollution, public health, jobs, etc. So there's lots of other data types that that domestic stakeholders may identify as useful for their involvement in climate policy making that are not required in any way by the UNFCCC. And that leads to a major point that I want to make. If you walk away with one thing, is that domestic governance is critical for climate change success. The UNFCCC the Paris Agreement was a massive breakthrough in getting all countries to sign on to reaching a global collective temperature goal, but its success and the ratcheting of ambition depend on domestic politics, institutions, laws, and so forth. And so that lack of enforcement mechanism internationally means that we need to pay attention to what countries are doing, and that includes for transparency, and that's why we're talking about open data. So I just want to talk about what are some of the success factors that we know. How does open data help provide impact? We know that if you have a supportive governance through policies, coordination mechanisms, and innovative bureaucracies that are incentivized to be transparent, to collaborate with civil society, you're more likely to have effective open data initiatives. If open data initiatives are continue to engage with data users to build trust that this is something that's going to be ongoing, that they're responsive to the data needs that users have, both in private and in civil society and private sector and across government with different agencies. We know that it's very much an issue in many countries, developed and developing, to share data effectively across agencies. That we need to make sure that open data and that underpins transparency is that we mobilize domestic and international finance and capacity building, through international climate funds, through initiatives like the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, to ensure that there's necessary technical capacity in data infrastructure. And that just opening up the data we found, through over a decade of work on open data is often not enough to ensure that different users and communities who may have been disenfranchised or marginalized, do not have the same access and awareness of available data, but are still very much affected by these decisions, and make sure that we reach those target audiences. Why should the climate community pay attention to this conversation? When these success factors are in place, we know from research such as that's come out of the NYU Open GovLab that open data has reduced corruption, that it improves efficiency and performance of governments, that it improves trust with the public, and helps solve big public problems. It's critical for open data to have a very targeted problem that's trying to address, but that problem, of course, is climate change, and governments and countries can identify the specific types of climate challenges that they face, the mitigation they need to make, and therefore open data should be a critical part of how they address that. Parties, and we have experts on our panel who can speak to this, are going to be negotiating the next phase of what's called Action for Climate Empowerment as part of the Doha Work Program at the Conference of Parties 26 in Glasgow in November. And open data and the learning that countries have had should really inform the outcomes and what that next work program looks like. Finally, coordination and accountability are going to be absolutely critical for effective climate governance. Coordination across government to leave no one behind and to bring all stakeholders into that decision making, to ensure that there's effective enforcement and implementation, and that governments are accountable to their civil societies. That's not enforceable through the UNFCCC. So this is something that open data can help civil society and other stakeholders understand where their governments are, what data is available, and what it tells them about their climate challenges and the actions their governments are taking. This is the working paper that we launched. I'm just going to be very fast here. Our target audiences were national government authorities that are implementing climate and open data strategies. Through our work through the Open Government Partnership, we found that oftentimes the open data, the agency working on open data and the climate office or the Ministry of Environment were not always closely linked. That is, I think that's improving in many countries. And fortunately, in the two countries, Uruguay and Chile, where we had a chance to do this, the two agencies worked together to bring together this cross-governmental workshop, invited civil society to discuss what types of climate data types are high priority for their countries. And essentially what we do is we identify, based on a global literature review, the benefits of open data strategies, that acknowledge the challenges in implementation, and provide recommendations, and it's all rooted in country examples. So if you're in a country that is beginning to implement an open data initiative for climate, I would highly recommend you take a look, and I'm happy to follow up with you and answer any questions. I'd now like to welcome our esteemed and diverse panel that I'm very thankful made time today. Brian Contreras Aguayo is an environmental engineer with the Office of Climate Change in the Ministry of Environment of Chile. He participated in the workshop that helped to inform this paper, as did our second panelist, Gabriela Verdiles Barrucci, Director of Projects at FEMA, an NGO that's based in Chile, a longtime observer of the UNFCCC, who is very active on climate and environmental governance issues. In addition, Gabriela is in charge of implementing FEMA's training and legal empowerment programs, and she works with communities affected by environmental and climate change injustices. We have Pierre Kranowski. Pierre is from the World Bank. He is a disaster risk management specialist at the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. He has worked in regions across the world, from Africa, Europe, and Caribbean, with expertise on digital platforms, open data, and geospatial data. And finally, my colleague, Meng Pin, who is an associate with our climate program, and she leads data analysis and tool development for the Climate Watch platform, which if you haven't heard about, I'm sure she'll be happy to introduce. And she also works on country level greenhouse gas inventories and countries' climate commitments, nationally determined contributions, and long-term strategies under the Paris Agreement. So I wanted to welcome everyone, and I think now we can turn from the presentation to our panelists. So I will stop screen sharing. And so for my first question, I'm going to start with Brian. Brian, your work at the Chilean Ministry of Environment includes implementing Chile's gender and climate change strategies, as well as promoting access to information and public participation as part of the Action on Climate Empowerment initiative. And I'd love to hear from you. What extent has Chile adopted an open data approach to implementing these objectives, and what benefits do you see?
Yes, well, thank you, Jesse. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. Yes, first of all, I need to say that I make a quick review of the past instrument of climate change of the office. And for example, the National Action Plan on Climate Change, which is from 1917 to 2022. There is an action that says create technological platform that groups all climate change related information. This plan includes principle of transparency, but nothing specific with open data. Also, the National Adaptation Plan, which is from the 2014, says nothing about these issues or this thing about information and open data. As well, the NDC of 2015. But now, recently, past year, we actually updated the NDC, and there is a whole commitment about develop this capacity building and climate empowerment strategy, which is related with ACE or climate empowerment. And this strategy has 5 elements, and one of them is public availability of information on climate change that facilitates the design and implementation of local actions. That's what the commitment, the compromise says. As you can see, there is no the word specifically like open data, but that's what we think about since we have this workshop and this approach to this open data approach. So right now we are looking, we are working in the design of this instrument. We are having some workshop with interest stakeholders. Also, we have this work with the support of the Open Data Charter and the WRI as well about this audit of climate-related data. And now we are taking back this work and try to analyze this data to finally upload them to the open data portal of the government, which is datos.gov.cl. And about the benefits, I see a lot of them. But as you said before, for implementation of public politics in general, in particular, those about climate change, transparency, of course, and where I most see benefit, it's about this ACE agenda. So for those who are not related, this have 6 elements: education, training, public awarenesses, public participation, access to the information, and international cooperation. So I think this approach of open data is fully, it's basic for all these 6 elements. Finally, I just wanna let you know about an example, an exercise we recently launched the ARCLIM, which is the Climate Risk Atlas. This is basically a platform in the web. It's already in there that concentrate a lot of some of risk maps about climate change for 12 sectors like mining, biodiversity, agriculture, and some other. And these have impact change. In this impact change are things like risk of change in productivity of some agricultural species like corn, cherry, almonds, beans, or some other. Risk of floods, premature mortality for temperature changes, risk of wildfires. So different risks about organized in these 12 sectors. And this has been very important and very useful because this is in a resolution of municipalities, so it's very local. So people in the territories in the other regions of Chile and to this level of municipalities can see their risk information related, climate related things, so they can download this information, make their own analysis, and that support the decision making. So this is not fully open because you can download the information in an Excel, also in GeoJSON for the part of geographical information, but it's there and it's public and it's accessible. So this has been a really good thing for climate action in territories specifically.
Thank you, Brian, for that great overview. And I imagine that there might be some interest at the end and what kind of, what prompted those platforms and that collaboration. And great to hear about that downscaling at the municipal level. Gabriela, your nonprofit FEMA, Chile's first public interest environmental law firm, works in a variety of ways to promote rights-based environmental governance for a safe and healthy environment and climate. I know that access to information is a major part of this work. Can you describe from a civil society perspective how open data can promote transparency and enable civil society, and I think this is crucial, to participate more meaningfully in decision-making.
Good. Thank you, Jesse, and hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I think to start, the idea of the Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration of 1992 is really important to recall this principle. It's the base of the sustainable development, and in environmental issues and climate change issues, it's really important to, in decision-making processes, this principle says that the best way to deal with this decision is with everyone and all the citizens that are concerning the different topics that are involved in these decisions. So it's important to, in environmental matters, to have access to information, also in climate change, but this information often is really complex and it's always changing, and generally requires technical knowledge to understand it. That's our experience also with communities. We work with communities all around the country, and it's not easy to access to this information. Not everyone has connection to internet, and also, as I said, you need some knowledge on different areas to understand this information. In addition, we see large asymmetries regarding who can generate an access to this information in terms of economic cost, or you can see some regulatory issues or barriers, maybe. This information in general is useful for better decision making because people can participate in an informed way. So it's important to, in the case of Chile, to improve this access to information. And also it's important, for instance, in accessing to justice, that is is in the heart of our organization. We defend communities affected by environmental problems. So if you don't have information, it's impossible to litigate, it's impossible to defend your rights. And regarding open data, I think all the progress that we have seen in having more open data is important because different organizations can use this information, can replicate this information, can amplify this, and share with anyone and create different platforms or initiatives. For instance, I wanna share with you an example. We have a program that's called Municipio Verde, or Green Municipality, and we, using the access to information law, we ask different local governments or municipalities what are the different green policies that they have. For instance, regarding waste management or climate change policies. Maybe they have adaptation plans, and we ask for that information and we process that information and we put it in a website. So we are doing sharing that information and also doing some workshop with communities. They can access to this information and call their authorities to have better policies in their comunas or municipalities. So for instance, in this election for mayors, we use a commitment, 10 points with a commitment, Municipio Verde. So all the mayors have to commit with different points, and all the citizens can monitor that these commitments are implemented. So that is a really good tool, but it's not easy. We get the information from the authority because there's a law, but sometimes the information is, and also municipalities has different budgets. So you can see municipalities that have quickly the information and give you in a Excel, or others just have different documents in really close data. So it's really important to make some progresses in this matter.
Thank you, Gabriela. I think you really hit on something important that I hope we have time later to talk about, which is that, open data in of itself is not policy change. It's not accountability. There are other steps along the way to get there. And I think you really highlighted what civil society, what FEMA and other civil society are doing to take that information, make it more accessible, and put it to use for policy change. So thank you for that very clear and illustrations and examples. Pierre, tragically, we're going to be seeing more climate-related disasters in the years to come. And that's why we have to really increase short-term ambition now. From your global perspective at the World Bank, how does open data support the ability of governments and communities to build adaptive capacity to protect the lives, livelihoods, and vital infrastructure of countries who are exposed and vulnerable to these impacts? Any insight into what factors help make these approaches most successful from your experience?
So hi everyone, and thank you, Jesse, for the invitation. So at the bank, we support governments, we support countries on climate change from both sides, on the reduction of climate change. So we have colleagues who are working on that, and also on the adaptation to climate change and reduction, mitigation of actually the risk from the climate warming. And on that, and for that, to be able to provide that support, and for governments to be able to implement projects that can support disaster risk reduction, we need the data. We need data to provide information on the risk. So first of all, I think it's important for all the people here to understand what type of data we are talking about when we are talking about the risk. So you need the data on who is exposed to those risks. You need data on the population. You need data on the physical infrastructures. You need the data on the hazards themselves. So drought. So when we are talking about climate change, so we are talking about drought. We are talking about floods. We are talking about heat waves and so on. So you need that type of information, either historical data or modeled data set, projected data sets. We are going to talk more and more about models, and that's another type of actually information, very important information. And with that, you need to be able to combine all those information, also considering, let's say, some scientific, let's say, analysis that will inform you about the vulnerability of your population to those different risks, and also taking into account the different climate change scenarios. So it's a lot of data, lots of uncertainty to be able to communicate to a government or to population a risk, and that's critical, and that's critical for that information to be transparent, not only to be able to provide the right and the most accurate insight, but also for the people to be able to accept the decisions that are going to be made based on those information. So that would be the first thing, that openness, and transparency of those information related to the risk is critical for the whole process, from decision making to uptake and implementation on any decision. But then how to do it? How to do it very concretely? Then that's where we come from, like commitment to transparency, to how to do it on the ground. What does that mean to do open data on the ground? And I suppose we'll have more time to discuss, but I think some of the key success factors already are the fact that when you talk about open data, you talk about a kind of infrastructure. You manage an infrastructure of information. And for that, you need to put in place processes. You need to have people who can manage that infrastructure. You need to have a budget, a recurring budget. Too often I see open data initiatives that start, from a grant or a one-year budget and with nothing after that. So that's kind of really very basic things, but that are critical for the long term. There are elements related to, for instance, procurements of those different type of elements. How do you procure digital infrastructures? Something that's not often easy for governments to do. So yeah, there are lots of different pieces that you need to put together. It's not easy, but it's quite critical, because in the end, that's the only way you can make people to collaborate. And I think for us, open data is also a symptom of good collaboration. When people start collaborating, when people start putting things together and finding a solution, that's where you see information being shared, right? So that's where you see open data.
Thank you, Pierre. You raise a lot of really really interesting points. I'd love to follow up later about, I have also seen these open data portals start off with a bang and then kind of fizzle out. And I think it would be great to hear from others later about what builds the sort of the institutional political support to maintain these. And also on the open data as a symptom of good collaboration. I like that. We've often heard from governments that it's not our challenge isn't identifying the right data types, but it's actually getting these different actors all together and getting them to cooperate and work together and share those data. So thank you for that. Mengpin, you manage WRI's Climate Watch platform, which provides an array of interactive analysis and visualizations to help users understand what countries are doing to tackle climate change and what progress they've made. Can you speak to how this is helping different users achieve change? And then critically, how would increased access to national or subnational data sets enhance these global tools that you made available to a broad range of stakeholders?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesse. And I have to say that a lot of the points that you was making with our thinking. And it is really my pleasure to share from the Climate Watch perspective. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Climate Watch is an open data platform managed by our team at WRI, and it is also a contribution to the NDC Partnership Knowledge Portal. And our data offering really centers around the country's climate progress and actions under the Paris Agreement. One of the core values that we see ourselves providing through Climate Watch is to help translate those information that could be in diverse forms that countries have been putting forward in their commitments submitted to the UNFCCC into easily accessible and understandable open data. And we offer those information through our curated country profile pages, sectoral tools, and dedicated modules, for example, on countries' climate commitments that includes NDC's strategies, net zero targets countries are putting forward, as well as modules on, for example, their historical greenhouse gas emissions and future emission pathways. And since last year in particular, we have really been emphasizing reaching out and engaging with our user community. And we had numerous conversations with thousands of users too. And those are in forms of public webinars and also private high-level trainings. So, and this is to exactly answer this question, Jesse, that you posed, is to understand how our users are using Climate Watch data, and in turn, how we could provide data that are more useful to them. And our users are from public-private sectors, civil societies, NGOs, and research institute, and perhaps an interest for this conversation to the national governments. And just to give a few examples of how our data are being used, and not naming the names, we have governments using Climate Watch data to understand how they compare with their peer countries, in, for example, their economic group or geographic regions when formulating their climate action plans. And our data is used through NDC implementation processes and to inform the improvement or enhancement of existing NDCs. And our emission data is used by a country to develop baseline when they're formulating their long-term strategy documents. And we also have, for example, development agencies who provide support and capacity building to countries that use Climate Watch data to inform their strategy when they're supporting developing countries. And those are really the types of conversations we would like to hope to have more with our users, and the feedback we would like to learn from our users. And in terms of the second part of the question, Jesse, first of all, because the scope of national and subnational level data is usually limited to that particular location, while Climate Watch itself is more at the global level, looking at particular topics, for example, emissions or NDCs across regions and countries. We have only been pursuing subnational information through our country platforms on Climate Watch India and Indonesia that we have built together with our colleagues from our international offices and the local partners. However, I do want to frame the situation in a way that because we are collecting information through this global tool, and we hope that, and this is our hope, that it creates sort of a demand for additional open data or a pressure for countries to be more transparent. And as a matter of fact, we have been seeing more countries providing information, more information to facilitate the clarity, transparency, and understanding of their NDCs in this new round of submissions, comparing to their first NDCs around 2015. And really, this really helps us populate indicators on our platform. And this, of course, stems from the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement that Jesse had mentioned at the beginning. But we hope to see this trend continue as more NDCs are still to be submitted by countries towards COP26 this year. And before I conclude, I should probably have mentioned that Climate Watch is not the only open data initiative out there, and we build our platform together with our partners, and we continue to engage with our working group and other research initiatives to align our efforts. And Climate Watch is not the only data platform at WRI. As an institute, WRI has an open data commitment to making our data and research freely available for anyone to access to use. So I really encourage our audience today to check out those great resources and hope that you could benefit from those open data that we have to offer. And now I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mengpin. We will make sure in the chat that that everyone has the URL of the Climate Watch website. Thank you for explaining. I think what you hit on that was really important was how you really you've tried to develop Climate Watch with an eye to what your users need, and you have lots of different users, but how it's helping governments understand how their actions compare to their geographical neighbors or their neighbors at their economic levels, how it's supporting civil society and others to understand progress and the contents of NDCs as these are rapidly coming in, new and updated and revised NDCs. We're waiting for that critical increase in short-term ambition. Mengpin, thank you, Corey, for providing those links in the chat. Mengpin, I'm not sure if you're wearing headphones, but there was some trouble hearing you. If it's possible to either use headphones, or I don't know if there's a different pair of headphones. If not, I'll do my best to try to make sure that folks are able to understand. But we had it was cutting in and out a little bit. Thank you. And so, in my experience, some people I've spoken to say, of course, climate change action needs to be data driven. We understand that, but why is open data necessary? What does that have to do with climate action? Why should anyone in the UNFCCC, why is it relevant to the critical conversations that are happening there? Governments have a lot of competing priorities for time and resources, and there are upfront costs, and Pierre addressed some of those in the technical capacity, the human resources, the political commitment. Digitizing data and implementing protocols and systems for countries that haven't already started down that path is going to take resources. You also have to keep them up to date, or it could have the adverse effect of undermining confidence and public trust if something starts and then it's not continued for a future effort. So starting with Brian, but I would invite others to contribute as well if they'd like to. Countries have legal obligations to be transparent, of course, but what are the other value propositions for making climate-related data open from your perspective? And what are some of the challenges that you've seen firsthand or you've experienced? They could be technical, they could be institutional, political, that you faced. And would you have, from Chile's perspective, any insight for countries that are implementing similar approaches, such as the one that you have through your Climate Risk Atlas and the other open data platforms that you mentioned?
Yes. Well, I think I see a lot of benefits of public data access information. I think, as Gabriela says, also it allows to the actor or relevant stakeholder involved with these issues, which is something that we wanted from, for example, this ACE strategy we are designing. We want more of people be involved, being active, being demanding for climate action, and also let them to supervise what the government are doing, and if it's not enough or not, or they need for more, be more I just forgot the word, but I mean, so let them the capability of or demand, you know. Also, another benefit I see is this related to the greenhouse gas emissions. Let them to track the trajectories of the emissions, and see if we are effectively reducing them, and you know, to reach the goals about mitigation. Also, something very like from internal, this process of making the report that in the framework of the UNFCCC, like National Communications Biennial Report. If we have this information available and open, it also will be easier for us to make this report. About challenges, I will say the coordination. I mean, the state, the government is big. It's a lot of institutions. All of them have their own processes, their own process, and how they publish the information. You know, like be all coordinated into this challenge of public the information in a format that is accessible and open. Also to like educate them, the institution, about this item of open data and what it is, and why an Excel is not that open, or a PDF is not that open, because most of the information that a state or government produce are in this formats. Yes, that's I will say.
Thank you, Brian. Would anybody else like to chime in on that question?
Yeah, I can try. You know, I think something that's quite important when you think about open data and how open data can be helpful in all that is you should start from the problem, from a problem statement. And so when we are talking about climate, you should start from either the policies that you're putting in place, the projects, and so on, and see how open data can help with that type of objectives, and not the other way around. I think too often we think that by some magic you're going to you know, open up lots of data and people are going to reduce their emissions. That's not how it works. How it works is that you need to think about how you're going to leverage the fact that you're going to have more data and what type of data open for you to achieve a specific goal. And let me take an example. In France, we know that one of the a big emission for the country is on houses, on buildings, right? So our priority is to reduce emission from buildings, to isolate, to insulate the buildings, to insulate the houses. How to do that, and how to do that in a way that you can scale up. And maybe there is open data can be helpful. If you start opening up more data, for instance, on energy audits of those buildings, then you can create a framework or a space where people, it will be easier for people to maybe find like companies, or find money to themselves to do the work, installation work, or you may have a new collaboration organization working together to prioritize the areas where you need to retrofit buildings and so on. So I think that's very important aspect of open data, is that it has to be tied to strategies. And the great thing is that with climate change, you have an opportunity to do that. And I would really recommend for anyone working at the country level to try to make that link between people who are working on open data initiatives and people working on those climate change strategies to work together, as you have done in Chile. And I think that's really a great example.
Thank you, Pierre. We have some great questions coming up. So I'm conscious of wanting to get through a few more questions and make sure we have a little time for Q&A. This is a question that I actually had for Pierre, but others can answer if they'd like as well. We identified a few key challenges in our paper to implementing open data approaches to climate, including a lack of awareness or understanding of open data practices, the technical capacity gaps, lack of a regulatory framework for information transparency, lack of political leadership or incentives. These align a lot with if you're familiar with open data challenges and learning that have been experienced in other domains, not just for climate change. I think what is clear is climate change is so cross-cutting, cutting across so many sectors from national, subnational, that the level of coordination, as Brian mentioned, is immense. Pierre, I think you've identified some of these. Would you add to that list of your experience working with different countries? Do any of these rise to the top to you in terms of the biggest challenges, or is it really depending on countries' sort of technical capacity and political context? Is it highly context specific, or do you see are we making progress in overcoming some of the institutional, the policy barriers in promoting open data? Are we moving towards other challenges? What do you see as kind of the paramount challenges over the next few years for implementing open data approaches?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we saw progress, right? I mean, 10 years ago, almost no country in the world was having an open data initiative, and nowadays, I don't have the numbers, but most of the advanced economies have an open data team in place. So on that, there are clearly progresses. I think one of the challenges is with regards to the most vulnerable countries, that those really that are going to be the most by climate change, and those that already suffer from chronic poverty and budget constraints. And those countries, it's going to be tough for them, to build all those infrastructures to the level of openness that we would like. So, and I think there are some solutions. And sometimes we think as open data or data products, digital products as something you manage and own. But often we also see that lots of those data, lots of those products are actually things that are shared in common. And for instance, you at the World Resources Institute, you are managing what we could call digital public goods. And I think it is important for those countries to also acknowledge the fact that they can't do everything alone. And they also need to be able to identify with who they can work with and what type of products they can leverage. And we are going to have more and more global data sets on climate, like from Earth observation, for that type of things. And I think that's really an opportunity for those countries to make benefits of those global level data sets so that they can focus on their local issues. For instance, census data. It's not something, that like data on population. It's not something that other countries can do for you or other people can do for you. So that should be your focus. And for instance, linking the gender issues to global hazards is something that you should be able to do. So I think the prioritization for those countries is going to be key. And for that, of course, they also need to receive the right advices. But yeah, I would say that on top of everything else, right prioritization, because you can't invest in everything, as you said. Yeah.
Thank you, Pierre. I would like to have a final question before we get to Q&A. Pierre, I thought you did a great job of summarizing how governments can be thinking about their priorities. Gabriella, I'd love to hear from a civil society perspective, and getting back to that issue of accountability. Getting as specific as you're able, either for Chile or across the Latin American and Caribbean region with partners that you work, what are the really critical high priority data types that need to be more accessible? Or are you seeing progress in recent years in accessing data that was unavailable before? And specifically thinking about addressing those climate adaptation resilience challenges, or pushing for greater ambition, monitoring policy implementation, and so forth.
I can share with you another experience that we worked on in 2019 with you, also, Jesse, an open data charter. We did a diagnosis or a research on what are the priorities for Chile, and we asked and we did some interviews with the different experts and agencies, public agencies, and also with civil society regarding the priorities on climate change data. And what we found that what are the key issues for governance or for better decision making in Chile is that first, to have better or updated system or inventory system on greenhouse gases emissions. Also to have, because there is no information on climate finance, that is really key for public policy, to have information on how Chile or agencies are spending money on different measures to fight climate change. Also on water systems. This is really critical in Chile. Water scarcity is a problem for more than 10 years in the southern zone and also in the south. So there's no good information available regarding water availability. And this is really critical also if you think in terms of energy transition. If we think lithium is important for energy transition, and lithium is extracted here in Chile in some salt flats in the north, and we don't know how is the capacity of these watersheds, and how will be these watersheds impacted by the destruction of these metals. So, and the other point is to have more information on territorial vulnerability also, and the impacts on oceans and biodiversity. That's are the priorities that we found. But also we found obstacles. Some of them, Brian said, some coordination. There's a critical or important lack of coordination among public agencies. There's no clear legal framework in Chile to gather to gather all the information that they generate. All the information is outdated, is difficult to understand it, as I said before. So it's not systematized. And so this is a challenge. We need to create a system on. And we have made some progress. Brian says mentioned the climate change risk atlas. This is a really important tool. For instance, I want to give an example in the sector of salmon industry that is really important in our country. The atlas include the risk of red tides. And the important with that are caused by different factors, but also with climate change in the south of Chile. So this industry is located in the south, and these events are more common. And this atlas said that this industry is going to be impacted, but not just the industry. The communities and the ecosystem that are there are really impacted by these tides all the years. So I think we have an opportunity today. We have a climate change law that is in the Congress. We're discussing that climate change. We can include open data commitment. And also we have the opportunity to include a commitment in the OGP plans, the open government plans. We're trying and working with the Ministry of the Environment to include that. And also in the region, other countries can do that. Can do the same, I think.
Thank you, Gabriela, for illustrating it with clear examples. I know we have 5 minutes left. I wanted to see how many questions we could get through. So if you I would just ask if folks could keep their responses brief, and we'll try to get through a few. The first is from Allison Merchant, thanking everyone for a great discussion. She asked, for Brian and others, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you've seen in terms of the intersection of climate, open data, and gender. Where can we use platforms like OGP to better advance commitments to close gaps on gender-informed open data on climate and natural resource governance? Brian, would you like to speak to that? And if anyone else would like to say a few words briefly?
Sure, yes. About this gender work, we've been working in this since 2019. We have a bureau which meets every month. Actually, right now there was this meeting where our invited some of the public institutions that works on climate change and also in gender. And we wanted to do this because we know that climate change affects differently people. If you have more money, if you have less money, also if you are a man or you're a woman, because there is a gap of different vulnerabilities. But we know that, but we don't have the data about that. So we've been working on that with the institutions, and also we've been reviewing some of the instruments institutions are making, like justice transition for decarbonization and some other, to try to include gender approach in this instrument. So, for example, keeping the example of the climate risk atlas, we have this information about the risk of some climate thing issues in territory, but we don't have, for example, not in all maps, the gender item. So if we could have this information and integrate it with the platform, we could see the risk, the climate change risk, for example, red tides or others, in the territory, and also with gender approach. So we could have this information like disaggregated. So we are working on this right now. We are in a process of having produced this data that support this statement, and keep. I mean, it's a work in progress. Yes.
Thank you, Brian. There's one kind of question on general capacity development, and I'm wondering if Mengpin or Pierre want to take this. Maybe Mengpin, if you want to speak to it. Generally, what do you see as the critical capacity development needs to make data more open to solve local climate change problems? I think Brian provided a great example of how they've downscaled their climate risk atlas to the municipality. In your conversations you've had with countries, Mengpin, have you what kind of capacity needs are you encountering?
Sorry, trying to see if I'm unmuting myself from the correct device. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, and sorry about the audio issues, and I don't know how much I should repeat myself from my past response. But I guess one of the things that we have trying to build through Climate Watch is to bridge the open data space from the information that countries have been providing in their official documents and submissions to the UNFCCC, and those comes under the reporting requirements under the UNFCCC, the national communications, the biannual update reports, and moving forward also how countries are implementing and the progress they have been making in their climate actions. And that includes both the mitigation front, which is more of my field, which is mitigation greenhouse gas emission, but that also comes into the resilience of countries and how they're adapt to the effects of climate change. So one of the efforts we have trying to build is to expand our information to from more mitigation focus to include more information beyond, for example, NDCs to their country's challenges and problems in their for example, in their national and in their NAPs, the national adaptation plans, that are more looking at adaptation component of it. And in terms of capacity development, it's really we're really looking at the global level and not as much to the local national subnational data sets that are more centered around a particular location. But for us to provide this global platform, it really gives a sense of, for example, what are the information that you might want to collect when you are addressing your climate issues. And those are and if through that you might see these are the gaps in terms of data collection, and this is where it could be helpful when you're at a point you would need to say, assess your progress of monitoring what your progress towards your actions and where actions might be lacking, where you might want to prioritize. But I hope this is helpful in making sense. But
yes,
hope others.
Thank you very much, Mengpan. We are at the hour, and I want to just again thank the panelists so much for your insight and your expertise, and really for giving very clear examples. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I'm thrilled that and there's many other wonderful Open Gov Week sessions that are going on. So please check the Open Government Partnership website for that. And want to thank all the staff that helped support this. There's several links that came out, and we will on the platforms and the resources that were mentioned here. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you again. Thank you. Bye.